Alright, as we start the Art Fundamentals section, we're going to take a look at shape, form, and detail, and this is really just to kind of solidify how you understand the structure of art and to kind of, I suppose, give you some perspectives on how to see art perhaps in three different ways, right? So the first thing that I'm going to kind of illustrate here is this triangle, and the triangle is made of three parts. It's kind of like in order of importance, right? And at the bottom we have shape, in the middle we have form, and at the top we have details. All right, and when we're talking about each of these categories, what we really want to think of is all the art theory that's related to these three sort of major categories of art. So shape, for example, is about composition. It's about your 2D iconographic shapes. It's about the dynamism of your shapes. It's about the read of your shapes. It's about silhouette and all those various elements, right? And of course, composition is extremely foundational, right? It's about the shape of your lights and so on. Form basically deals with perspective, light, and drawing in 3D in terms of, you know, are you establishing solid forms that make sense in a space, and that space is defined by perspective, right? And in terms of lighting, are you lighting objects in a way that you can see their form? So form is related to everything that gives us a perception of three-dimensionality. And then lastly, details refers to sort of your textures, your literal smaller details of objects, as well as the color of things. All right. So the way you kind of want to understand art theory, the way art theory is sort of structurally built, is in this shape, form, details kind of model, where shape is the most important consideration theoretically, then form, and then details. All right. But let's just take this, move it to the side here, and add another triangle. We're going to have three triangles, three different ways that you guys should think about kind of the structure of art, right? Let's put another triangle here. Actually, let's just make these a little bit smaller so we can fit the third one nicely. All right. Now, the second kind of way that you want to think about art, so this is the theoretical, let's call it hierarchy. Okay, so when you're drawing, you want to be thinking about shape first, then form, then details in terms of what is structurally important to the piece. However, your implementation theory, this is how you actually are going to work, right? How you're practically going to work. So we can just call this practical as well, right? And this is basically shape and form happening simultaneously. Sorry, mind you, let's call it form and shape. That's because, and then lastly, this would be details, right? And the reason it's form and shape is to the viewer, and we'll do the viewer's triangle just now, but basically we need to be drawing 3D objects as realists, right? So we're doing imaginative realism, or representational art as it's called. And so everything we do needs to be three-dimensional, makes sense in time, in space, in a place with lighting and so on, right? And so we always need forms. But we can see from the theoretical hierarchy that shape is extremely important. So we need to draw the forms, but then let shape inform the 2D shapes of the forms, so the silhouettes of those forms, right? Nevertheless, we'll get into this a little bit deeper later on in terms of when we're doing practical drawing and things like that. But it's important to know that we want to approach how we draw, like our practical side of drawing, as both form and shape happening at the same time. We're thinking about these at the same time. And then once we've got that down, then we do details, right? And the details in terms of drawing could really be the refined process. And that would be like clean lines and all the details and the nice beautiful hairlines, and this would be your rough or your plan process, right? So here you can see kind of a little picture into the workflow of how we would draw. We do a rough and a plan, which would embody form and shape, and then the refined drawing on top would draw on those forms and shapes that we've done, adding the details to them, and then we'd have a nice completed drawing. Okay, so just a way to think about it, right? This is our theoretical hierarchy. This is our implementation theory, and implementation hierarchy, if you wish. We start with form and shape, and then we do details. And actually, let me just really clarify this. The details are always a lot simpler to do once you've got a solid foundation. So I think a lot of beginner artists especially, they will worry about the details very much, but this is kind of how we want to kind of weight our work when it comes to actually doing the practical side of drawing, right? Lots of work on the forms and the shapes, and then you don't need that much work on the details to finish up. Although ironically, as a side note, this is really the 80-20 rule. So they say 80% of the work takes 20% of the time to do. So you can see 80% of the work here is form and shape. It's only going to take 20% of the time to do. And conversely, the details, even though they're sort of 20% of like the thought and the theory, they're going to take 80% of the time to do, because you'll end up spending much more time refining the drawing. But you can only do that on a very solid foundation, right? Which is form and shape. All right, and then the last triangle, which is just nice and fairly straightforward to understand, is how the viewer sees. So let's just say the viewer's perspective. And this is important to know, just so that you have a kind of a good, well-rounded understanding of the sort of, you know, the theoretical structure of art theory, art practical, and also how the viewer sees things. So the viewer really sees things, I would say, in a combined way, but generally speaking, they'll see things kind of as forms, and this would be halved like that, I would say. Forms and then details. And viewers typically, they're not looking at shape composition and composition. I'm talking about your sort of typical average viewer, or even when you yourself are looking at artworks. You know, you have this mode of art appreciation, and that mode is much different from sort of art analysis. Because when you're looking at a piece that you really like, or you've got artwork, a little artwork folder or artwork collection or something, right? Or maybe it's a big folder, who knows, where you've got collected artworks. When you look at stuff that you like, you kind of are enamored by it. You're sold. It's managing to persuade you of its believability. And so you're really noticing the forms first, and then the details second. And you can kind of see here in this sort of third triangle. Let's just kind of label these 1, 2, and 3. Oh, actually, perhaps that's not a good idea. Let's just call it A, B, and C, right? You'll kind of notice in this third triangle why, excuse me, why beginners struggle so much when they're starting to draw, right? Because they're going on what they've seen, and what they've only seen and believed to be true about the world is basically the forms and the details, and they're generally equally weighted. So they'll kind of try and draw something that looks like a head and then fill it with a million details. You know, that's kind of a common beginner problem. But nevertheless, how we see things is different from how we make things, and is different from the theory of things. So another way to understand this is kind of the recipe of a cake, right, is quite substantially different from how you actually make the cake, right? And quite substantially different, that is, to how you taste the cake, right? So there's kind of an analogy in there, and hopefully that's helpful to you. So this is essentially the kind of structure of art, right? And all artworks really fit into this, not just drawing. You know, drawings, paintings, landscapes, portraits, and so on. Character designs, vehicle designs, everything really kind of fills into this kind of structure when we're looking at how art is made. Nevertheless, that is pretty much the end of this lesson. And we're going to move on to technicalities versus emotional impact, which is kind of a high-level topic in some senses. But hopefully this has helped you understand the structures and really constantly revisit this video, and especially focus on point 2 as to how we needed to implement form and shape at the same time, then details. And please know that we will get into detail on these shape elements as we move through the course. So you will know what shape really means, what forms really mean, what details really mean as we move through the course. Cool. Catch you in the next lesson.